Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 32 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today I had a very stimulating conversation with Cherilyn Christen Clough, who is the founder of The Little Red Survivor, which is an online support community for survivors of narcissistic and religious abuse. She is also the author of the brand new hot off the press memoir called Chasing Eden. And we talked about a lot of different things. There are lots of little gems in this conversation. And so without any further ado, let's dig in. Cherilyn, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Natalie. I'm just so excited to be here. I've been listening to your podcast, read your book. I'm so excited by the work you're doing. Well, and I'm honored.
Oh, well, I'm really glad that you agreed to come on. I've been actually reading your blog for a long time now. I don't follow very many blogs. In fact, I could put on one hand, there are less than 5 blogs that I actually follow, and yours is one of them. And I've been following you for a long time.
I'm so honored.
And I feel like your blog is this little gem that is kind of hidden. And I would like to spend the first part of our podcast just talking about your blog so that people know what you write about and they can go find you and also, subscribe and hear from you on a regular basis. So can you tell us the name of your blog is Little Red Survivor, which I love. Why is it called Little Red Survivor, and what is your blog about?
So, Little Red Survivor, I started looking up the story of Little Red Riding Hood. When I was little, I had a red coat. My mom called me Little Red. She didn't believe in telling fairy tales. This is the only fairy tale she told me. But when I was thinking about my pain from my childhood, I looked up Little Red Riding Hood on the internet, and I read all the old stories of Little Red, and I found one of the most ancient stories was a story of Little Red Riding Hood who saved herself. She didn't need the woodsman or Prince Charming to save her. But when she went to the house and she recognized the wolf, she decided to make a plan of escape. And she asked the wolf if she could use the outhouse. And the wolf said, sure, as long as you keep a string tied onto your finger so, he could keep track of her. So she went to the outhouse, untied the string and tied it to the outhouse door and made her escape. And I love that story. It's an old German. It's one of the oldest renditions of that story. And I love it because Little Red saved herself. And I realize all of us who have been in abusive childhoods or abusive marriages, we can save ourselves. And so I chose to name my blog Little Red Survivor.
I love that. That is one of the things that I try to teach women is that they have to be their own best advocate. I say that over and over and over again because it seems like I know that at least for me, I was looking for years for someone to rescue me. I kind of took on that. Well, I can't really do anything for myself because I'm a woman, and I have to be submissive and everything. So I need like a mommy or a daddy, like a pastor or somebody to come along and tell me what I can and can't do. And that kept me stuck.
That's the traditional background that we grew up in.
Yes.
Especially in the church.
Exactly.
Where the only people who have communion are men in gray coats. And the rest of us solemnly sit on the pews while they are up high, and they're in the position of honor, when actually the whole idea of communion was to serve each other.
Wow.
But the men are exalted. And so as women, we are just taught to clean up afterwards or put the tablecloth on,
Right,
so
right.
We need them. It's almost like we're supposed to just do what directions they give us. And, that's a sad thing in fundamentalism and Christianity.
It is. Okay. So your blog, when I found it, my situation, at least when I found your blog, I was thinking that I was just in a destructive marriage. I didn't realize at that time the extent of the dysfunction in my family of origin. And your blog helped educate me because you have a great marriage. So your blog was more about narcissism in general and also narcissistic relationships maybe with your family members. Is that correct? I mean, that's kind of the flavor I get.
My husband and I both grew up with narcissistic families, and we had a lot of brokenness to deal with. And in the first couple of years of our marriage, we almost practically killed each other. And we went to a state fair and we saw them writing on paper plates and tracing their hands. And they wrote, "These hands will never be used for violence." And we realized we had thrown things at each other and hit each other before. And so we traced our hands and we made that pledge that our hands would never be used for violence. And that changed. That was a turning point probably in our very early marriage. We were newlyweds still, basically, when we saw that. And that really woke us up to, wow, we are children of violence. We came from families of violence. And the truth is, most people that grew up in a narcissistic home will often marry a narcissistic spouse because that was what love looked like.
Right.
So we don't know better until we learn better, like Maya Angelou said.
Right. No, but neither one of you was narcissistic. You just were survivors.
But I'm going to shock. Maybe you don't know the whole story because my husband is bisexual. And he felt like he could only marry a woman, so he married me. He loved me. I was his best friend. He thought I was cute, but he also was attracted to men. And that was a very hard thing in the early part of our marriage because the church is screaming at you, the only way you're accepted is if you're completely straight and in a straight marriage. Mm-hmm. And then, we always had that under the undercurrent. So that was the biggest, he felt like he couldn't be authentic. And he came out a couple of years ago. We're still married after going on 30 years this year. And it's because we love each other. We're best friends, but we've decided not to judge anyone where they're at, whether they stay with someone or not, or many people will be like, "Whoa, that's terrible. It's a bad topic." And I hope I haven't just wrecked your podcast by mentioning that. But we have to be honest with where people are coming from.
Right.
People remember from their childhood, they know nothing but what they're attracted to. And we can't really control that for them. And I can't control it for my husband. I just let him be himself. But we have a monogamous, honest relationship. For 30 years, we've been each other's back,
Right.
But we had to learn to conflict resolution and to treat each other with respect always.
Right. But there's in your marriage.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in your marriage, though, there are two people that are working hard to make that happen.
Yes.
You don't have, it's not Absolutely. A one-sided thing. And that's
Absolutely.
What's important. So when you bring up things or when you give feedback to each other, the other one considers that, respects that, gives you a place
yes.
where your voice is heard, where you are respected as an individual in your own right. Even the fact that you respect your husband and his, where he's coming from, he's still a human being with a right to have his own perspective on life. And you respect that and give him a safe place to land. Yeah.
Right. And I think that we were neither one of us the narcissist in our family. We were the empath in our family. So
well, that's beautiful.
I was lucky in that sense.
So, right.
But many people listening might say, well, what's wrong with me that I married a narcissist? I should have known my dad was a narcissist or my mom was a narcissist. The bottom line is you can't always realize that when you're young and you get married.
Right.
Especially if you don't know what narcissism is to begin with. I didn't even know what narcissism was until a few years ago. No, that's all of that kind of information has just been exploding in recent years. Back when we were growing up, and even the young people today, I mean, I've got kids who are in their 20s. They don't, my kids are learning about it, I think, because of their experience. But a lot of kids, they still don't know. I really think it needs to be part of, there needs to be a class that everyone goes through in high school or even junior high, a class in junior high and high school that teaches dysfunctional relationship issues and how to handle yourself, how to maintain who you are as a person in spite of the way that others might define you or treat you. That's a skill that everyone needs to learn.
So we just kind of throw ourselves under the bus. People who grow up in families like that, who are empaths, throw themselves under the bus and let people like narcissistic, kinds of people sort of run the show. And they don't really know what to do about that. But there are skills that you can learn. Anyone can learn them. Even if you are a quieter, more passive person, you can still learn these skills and stand up for yourself.
Yeah, I would say the first one of that is just understanding your boundaries. Dr. Henry Cloud, the author of the book Boundaries, he says boundaries are where you begin and I end. And if I don't know where I end and my husband begins, we can't have good boundaries.
Right.
We both have to know the beginning and the ending of me and what I'm capable of. And the issue with empaths is that we want to help everyone and serve everyone, and we feel for them before we feel our own feelings sometimes. So when a narcissist loves nothing more than to find and target an empath, an empathetic person who they can use to do what they want. And so many of us who are empathetic have been used by narcissistic people.
Yes.
And I've heard that narcissists will choose an empath to marry.
Right.
Because then they can get her to bow to everything they say and, do everything they want.
Yeah, it works for them. So if someone I'm sorry.
I was going to say that's basically what my website, I started it when I began my deconstruction. And I first wrote a religious website trying to help people understand that the Old Testament shouldn't be taken so literally. And then I learned about narcissism. But by that time, my parents were barely speaking to me. And I realized someone invited me to join a Facebook group on narcissism for adult children and narcissistic parents. I didn't even join it right away. I just ignored it a few times. And then the night I went there was the night before my birthday. It was actually the night before my 50th birthday. And I went there and oh my goodness, these people were telling the same stories that I had in my stories.
Yeah.
We had so much in common. It looked like somebody had taken a script and all of our parents were copying off the same script.
Yep.
The next day when it was my birthday, I got up, I was going on a trip with my husband. The sky was so beautiful at dawn and I was drinking my coffee and I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm free because I know that this isn't about me anymore. And that's why I started writing my website about narcissism, because I realized other people could be free too.
Yes. So if someone was going to go over to your blog for the first time, where would you tell them to start? And we'll put these links in the show notes as well. But where should they start?
Well, it's pretty easy for them to find anything on a topic that they want because of the format that I have my blog in. My blog is listed so that if you're looking up a topic, you can do a search and you just do a search for flying monkeys, narcissist, memoir, dysfunctional families, I call it religious narcia. It's narcissism dressed in snarky religious clothes. And the church is full of it, don't you?
Yes.
Many people have suffered under that. And another topic I have is equality, because I believe that women and men are equal. And but people can, and another one, at the top of my blog, there's all these topics. So you don't have to do a search. You can just click on forgive, and everything that has forgiveness will be there. And that forgiveness will explain to you that it's not just about forgiving and forgetting like the narcissist will tell you, but it's actually about what it means to truly forgive in God's way. And, all of those topics that they click on will bring up all the blogs that are on that topic.
Okay, so do you know what your most shared or most beloved blog post of all time has ever been? What is it?
Yeah, my most famous blog post is how to, let me just think. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's because there's a whole bunch of topics. A whole bunch with that name. A flying monkey by any other name is still a frickin' flying monkey, or 3 ways to disable flying monkeys. People really are struggling with the people that come after them, that the narcissist sends to take them down.
Yes.
And another one is word salad. People are really care about that. I don't know why, but that one just triggered a lot of people, and they just keep. These have been shared thousands and thousands. Narcissistic word salad. It's been shared like thousands of times. Ali Shahida. I can't remember her name, how you say her name.
Oh, yes. I love her.
She picked it up and put it in an article of hers, and it's gone around the world over and over and over and over, I think. And I mean, I'm often will say your stats are up, and it's that narcissistic word salad thing. People just like that one. But yes. I would say the flying monkeys are the one that most people will come to in narcissistic abuse, because a lot of people realize what a narcissist is, and they realize this person was abusive to me, but they don't know what to do with the flying monkeys who come behind.
Right.
You know, and it feels like, and I think it's like the wound first comes from the narcissist and all the belittling things they say. I listened to your podcast the other day of the women who wrote that poem about pain.
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness, that ripped my heart out. I just bawled listening to it because I know what that feels like. And not from my husband, but through my parents, you know. Yeah. And you keep thinking you're crazy all the time. Well, then when all the flying monkeys come after you, which that name comes from the Wizard of Oz and the witch sending out the flying monkeys. Mm-hmm. Basically, that's often the siblings or the people that support the narcissist. Well, that's reinforcements for the narcissist, and their cutting remarks are sometimes more damaging than what the narcissist did, because you knew the narcissist was a jerk.
Right.
But then you didn't expect your sister would be, not your favorite sister.
Right.
The one that you love with all your heart, and you just sent her a birthday present. She just trashed you.
Right, exactly. Well, and the narcissist they'll say, I know mine said, well, you know, Natalie, she's got problems with her mother, problems with her sister, and relationship problems with her daughter. I have a daughter that's got emerging borderline personality disorder. And, you know, I've got 9 kids, but one of them has this issue. And I have problems with her, but so does everyone else. And she's also had problems with her former pastor who abused me in many different ways. So anyway, it was like, well, she's got all these problems. What's the common denominator? Natalie. So, and that really, that makes you feel like, oh my gosh, maybe I have the problem. And you've been told that your whole life, that you're the problem. So yeah, it's very, it's extremely traumatizing.
Let's unpack what happened there. Because I'm a person who's been told since I was a little kid, if everyone else has a problem with you, then you must be the problem.
Yes,
but the reality is, if there's a narcissist who's going along talking about you to everyone, or maybe when you came against abuse, you stood up for it. The bottom line is, there's a saying, and I can't remember the person who said it, but well-behaved women don't make history. And this is because well-behaved women stood up. Well-behaved women don't make history because they just bend whatever people want them to say. But if you want to be a woman who makes history, you're going to have to fight the lies. You're going to have to stand up for truth. And when you do that, there's always going to be opposition and resistance. There's just no way that you're not going to have resistance if you stood up for the truth. And sometimes the first truth we had to stand up for was ourselves and our family of origin, ourselves in our marriage, or ourselves with our pastor. I've had some crazy abusive pastors myself. Mm-hmm. And I've seen horrible things happen, you know, not necessarily to me. I've just been an eyewitness. And, you know, I've stood up to tell the truth, because I once walked in on a pastor who was having sex with a girl in his office. And she just came to the church to learn about God. She was 20 and he was in his 50s. And because I told the truth, the conference president said, well, it'll probably be your word against his. I'm like, well, you know, what's the difference between my word against his? I mean, I actually saw him with his pants off. You know, that's creepy. That's not how you want to see your pastor. And why would they leave this man? They left him being the pastor in this church for another 9 months. Honestly, it's bizarre. And the truth is stranger than fiction. And when we stand up and tell the truth, people fight us. But, you know, I know that I was right, and it wasn't my fault that I walked in on it. It was an accident. But, you know, and then he had the nerve to he had to give me a ride home. It was so awful, because I got a ride with the pastor, and then they both gave me a ride home. And then he said, well, if you want to help us again, let us know. And I waited till I was out of the car, and then I slammed that door and I go, I don't think so.
Unbelievable. I cannot believe that. That is so absolutely bizarre.
He was sociopathic, pathological liar.
He was. The level of denial there is just insane. Well,
So then when people say that we're liars, usually they're reflecting the narcissist. So we can't care. We just cannot care what flying monkeys say.
That's right. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about your book. So you have a new book out. Have you ever written a book before? Is this your very first book?
I helped edit a book called The Servant God, which was published by a large university press. And I was just an editor and I wrote 2 chapters in it. So I'm listed as an author on that, but it wasn't really my baby. That project I just joined.
Okay.
And then I put out my grandparents' love letters, which we found 100 years later. And they told their whole story of their romance. And so it's Love Letters 1909. So I published that 5 years ago. But that wasn't really my writing. This is the first time I've written my own book that's about me and my story.
Okay. I'm about halfway through it. It's very well written. I love it. It reminds me of Tara Westover's memoir, Educated, which I read last year. It was my personal favorite book of last year that I read, and I read a lot of books. And
that was mine too.
I can relate to a lot of what you talk about in your book as well. I mean, not all of it. It's different in some ways, but one of the things that's intrigued me about your book, there's 2 things. One is that you expose in a beautiful way, actually, the subtleties of narcissistic abuse. It's not always, the raging and the beating. I mean, there was some of that in your story, but there's also a lot of subtle things, and you've kind of woven them in there in a very gracious way. And then the second thing kind of goes along with that it is very actually gracious toward your family. Even though they've done these things, you beautifully show that these are people with depth of, they have character flaws. They're real human beings. So there's like a good side to them, and there's a lot of good things that they did and brought into your life. And then there's this dark side for whatever reason. And those kinds of things they just weren't able to get a hold of. And that spilled over onto how they treated you. So why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah. I'm so honored that you're getting that. That's what I want people to hear because, I love my mother and my father. They're still alive. They're in their 80s. I have no desire to hurt them. But at the same time, this is a story that we lived 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to tell the truth because I needed to live an authentic life, to be myself and own my story. And yet at the same time, my goal isn't to damage them. Narcissistic people look at everything as black and white, and they see people, they like to turn people into villains. They scapegoat one person. Right now, I'm the scapegoat in the family. A few years ago, it was my brother who was the scapegoat because he became an atheist. And whoever is the person they're against at the time becomes the scapegoat. And when someone becomes a scapegoat, they can't see any good about them. Well, I'm not a narcissist. I don't want them to look scapegoated. I realize there's a nuance of all kinds of things in our lives. All of us have good and bad traits. None of us are perfect and none of us are total demonic, Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to show the truth of who my parents were, who they were as I was a child, and also the journey that they went on. Events in their lives formed them to become the people that they became, just as the events in my life formed me. And we all get to choose how we allow these events to form us, if we want to embrace truth or we want to keep hiding. I've chosen to embrace truth, I believe, probably a little more than they have. And but at the same time, I wanted to tell the story. I heard a teenager that was abused say, the love, when your parents, it's hard. If you have a really mean, nasty stepmother, well, then she never does anything nice for you. Well, then it's easy to see her as a villain. But if you have a loving parent who also abuses you, that's really hard to figure out as a child. And that's how it was for me. I had a covert mother and I had a more malignant father in the way their narcissism played out. And I once asked my husband, I kept saying for years, well, which of my parents is a narcissist? And he said, they're like 2 Death Stars spiraling around each other, Sherry. It's like they both have their own game they play in the gaslighting. To get together, they are like powerful again, when you're trying to figure out the truth.
Yeah.
But the love was still there when I was younger. And I think the love is still there sometimes. I just think that they're damaged and they don't know even really how to express love. So my choice was to just try to tell it like it was and give them grace. And I hope I'm able to do that. I want honor and honesty because, the root word for honor is honesty. And I can't honor them unless I can be honest. And at the same time, that honesty also includes the good things they did.
Right.
I heard a teenager say, it's like mixed vegetables where you like the corn, but you don't want the lima beans. Then that's what it's like growing up with a parent that's abusive and loves you at the same time.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
That's a great picture.
Love from them. You glean the love from them, and then you hide when you know that they're not in a good mood.
Yep. We forgot to say what the name of your book is.
Chasing Eden, a memoir.
Yes, Chasing Eden, which I love the name. That reminds me of Sarah Bareilles' song, Eden. Have you ever heard Sarah Bareilles? Are you familiar with her?
Yeah, but and I had this name Chasing Eden all my life practically because my dad has been always trying to build. He said, let's build our own Garden of Eden and live off of the land, and wait for Jesus to come. So we were always trying to live in this utopia where, and many Christians have done this, prepper families, fundamentalist prepper families. You find this in a lot of fundamentalist Christian groups. They're waiting for Jesus to come. Some stockpile weapons. We didn't stockpile weapons, but the mindset was we need to grow our own food and put up all this food and dry all this food. And that way, when we have to run from the time of trouble, we'll have all this extra food. And like Tara Westover said in her book, Educated, she was like, nobody ever really explains what you're going to do with all this stuff. But they had lots of peaches,
Right.
My family was more chaotic because my dad could never stay in one place. At least Tara's family stayed in one place. But
how do you transport all that stuff everywhere you go?
We did a few times, and then other times we just gave up. We didn't even have stuff, But then that also was leading to the despair because, oh no, we're not ready. We don't have a place of our own to grow all this stuff, So this Chasing Eden, it became a burden.
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many, I can relate to some of that too. Well, a lot of us, I think a lot of Christians even use the whole Y2K thing as that was going to be, Jesus was going to come right around Y2K. The whole world was going to fall apart. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I fell into that. And I mean, but I was very steeped in fundamental Christianity. I was raised in a very somewhat similar family. My family was not they were not as unstable, I guess, as I would describe your family. But there was still the idea that Jesus was going to come back before you grew up. My mom told us that, or my mom's best friend told all of us that Jesus was going to, there was this, mall going up in our town and shopping mall. And she said, Jesus is going to come back before that mall gets built. Well, that mall not only got built, but now it's actually closing. Probably going to be torn down. So, and
that happened to us too in Walla Walla. In the mall that was the brand new mall has goats living on the land now.
Oh my gosh.
Weeds growing up everywhere and goats running around. It's hilarious.
So anyway.
So much for Jesus coming, right?
Exactly. And it's not that we wouldn't welcome Jesus coming back. It's just that you can't live your life like that. No. And also just the idea that Christians are, that there's this small group of Christians that are going to escape and then God is going to burn everybody else forever and ever in all eternity. It just, I don't know. It's a very frightening concept.
What a cool dream. Yeah. And it takes away the understanding of God being like Jesus.
Exactly. Just, in fact, that point, I will say that one of the most healing things that I did, and I've read through the Bible every year since I was a kid, but a couple of years ago, I just focused on the Gospel of John because I just wanted to get to know Jesus. And I thought, I have to just throw everything else out right now at this point in my life and just find out who was Jesus, how did he live his life, and if I want to be a follower of him, what would that actually look like? And I read that book over and over again about 20 times, and just really, it was so healing. It was just extremely healing. And everything.
I think that's my favorite book of the Bible.
Yeah, I love that book. It made it clear so many things up for me. And then I had to figure out, okay, now what do I do with the Old Testament? And I was just telling Cherilyn before we started doing this podcast, and so I'll put in a plug for a different podcast called Almost Heretical. So if you are listening to this podcast right now and you're hearing some things that you think, oh my word, that's almost heretical, and if you like that, you should head over to Almost Heretical podcast. It is, and start at the beginning. So don't start, I think they have like over 70 episodes, but start at the very beginning because they lay this foundation for the Old Testament, and it's extraordinarily fascinating. And so anyway, I'll just do that quick plug. And by the way,
that sounds awesome. I'm going to listen to it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I've been binge listening this last week. I can't stop, but I've been going to sleep to it and everything. But I just want to say that is for anyone who's listening and wondering, is this a Christian podcast? If this is your first time here, if you listen to my other podcasts, you will realize that, yes, this is a Christian podcast. Yeah. I am a lover of Jesus Christ, and I bow to Jesus Christ alone. And so does Cherilyn. And we are all about being the hands and feet of Christ in this world. And what does that look like? And how do we spread the good news of Jesus and spread his love in this world? And how do we, and that does not look like oppressing other people groups, whether it's other women or any kind of people group, because Jesus was not about oppressing people. And I was excommunicated from John Piper's church. And to me, that's oppression. That is.
Oh my goodness, you have a badge of honor, my dear.
I know. And I wear like a badge of honor too. I actually love it that they excommunicated me.
Praise God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. And I think it was God just rescuing me and also revealing the reality of what was actually going on over there. If I had just left and I left 2 years before they excommunicated me, actually. So, and then they chased me to the next church that I was going to and had talks with the elders there and tried to get them to get rid of me, even though I wasn't a member and will never become a member of another church again. But anyway, so that's my story though. And I want to get back to yours.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is the controlling of the patriarchy. And John Piper and Grudem, they started the Danvers Statement back in the 80s. The Danvers Statement was to work against equality for women. It was to say, oh no, we believe in compatibility. What do they call that? Not compliance, but it might as well be compliance, because they say women are equal but different. Right. And that means that women are equal, but they should bow down and do what we ask them because we're the men in charge. Right. And then they started the Nashville Statement a couple of years ago. That group has done more to oppress people in Christian churches than probably any other group, because of their false teachings. And they do not embrace the equality of Jesus, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They all serve each other. They're all one God, serving in unity, serving each other. And that's how we should be.
That's right.
It's very false doctrine John Piper has.
It reminds me of the book Animal Farm, where they said all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. It just doesn't work that way. And what happened in that book, Animal Farm, if anyone's listening and has never read it, read it. What happens in that book is, the animals that are more equal than the other ones take power and oppress the other ones. And that's exactly what's happening in the church through this kind of theology. But okay, so you said something before we got on the podcast, Cherilyn, that I wanted you to share. And it was the verse that talks about how we're going to overcome the world, and how people, when they, because you shared, it took you 7 years to write this memoir, which I find fascinating. And also I talk to a lot of women who say, I want to write my memoir. I thought of that myself, but most of us don't really know, like I told you before, I don't really know how to write my memoir, and will anyone even believe it? I know my family will say that's not true. But you brought up a Bible verse that talks about how we're going to overcome the world, and you kind of tied it into writing your own story. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think I learned this from Dan Allender. I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he was talking about how Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, and all of these people in this family had great dysfunctional stories, which were told in the Bible. And if we did not have their dysfunctional stories, we wouldn't have the Bible as we know it. And how they each overcame. And then he talked about in Revelation 12:11, it says, they triumphed over him, and they're talking about the dragon or the evil in the world. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb. And, the blood is the life. It says in Leviticus, the blood is the life of Jesus, and by the word of their testimony. And that's the part that I highlighted in yellow, big letters and around it in my Bible. We triumph by the word of our stories, by telling our story and owning our story honestly. That's how we triumph over evil in this world.
I love that.
And that gave me new confidence that, yes, God was calling me to write my story. And it's not just me on some ego trip to write this book, but this is actually ordained by God to tell my story. And it's just as true for you and everyone else who wants to write a story.
You were talking about a memoir that you read many years ago that kind of inspired you along these lines, and also kind of inspired you about how the flavor of your memoir, how you wanted it to be. Can you talk about that?
That was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, and it's to me the queen of all memoirs in the modern genre, as far as I'm concerned. Although Tara Westover's book Educated is pretty close, and I believe that Jeanette Walls inspired me. Someone heard my story, told me to read her book, and I read her book, and I just cried and cried because I realized she wrote with love for her parents and still showed the abuse. And she didn't write with hate. It wasn't a rant. Sometimes people who have been through narcissistic abuse, they're not sure what to do with it. So they just say, oh, I wrote a story, and they self-publish it. And it's a rant. I've read a whole bunch of memoirs in the last few years, like you said you have. And you probably know those kind of memoirs. You're reading them, and they're the mommy dearest memoir. And it's just blah, blah, blah. And this happened. And she was so evil and so mean and blah, blah, blah. And it's you're exhausted by the end of looking at it, Yeah. I didn't want to write a story like that. I wanted to tell a real story that shows good and bad and happiness and beauty along the way too. And Jeanette Walls did that. She patterned that for me. And after her book came out, there was an interview on Facebook, and it said, you could ask Jeanette a question. And I asked her, I said, what would be your advice to me who wants to write my own memoir now that I'm inspired by you? And she said, I will give you my mother's words, tell the truth. And my mother would not tell me to tell the truth. My mother was the one who orchestrated all the lies in our family. She was really an architect of lies. She comes up with all kinds of stuff, spends hours trying to figure out the best way to convince someone something. And when Jeanette Walls, whose mother just plain let her, she said, tell the truth, even though it would make her look bad, I thought, wow, I'm going to take that. I'm going to tell the truth. And thank you, Jeanette Walls. Thank you to Muriel Walls, her mother, for letting her daughter be free to tell her story.
Right.
And I believe that God is a mother and a father, and God says to us, tell the truth, because Jesus says, I am the truth. People say, well, do you know the truth? And then they talk about their doctrine like it's the truth. I was raised in a church that said, we have the truth. And they always talked about their doctrines. But Jesus said, I am the truth. And when Jesus is the truth, Jesus stands on the side of the truth, and he stands on the side of the truth tellers. So I'm no longer afraid to tell the truth. Jesus has my back.
I love
and he has your back too. If you're out there listening and you want to write a memoir and you're afraid, just ask Jesus to show you how to do it, because he has your back.
Right. And I love how the truth is not just all bad, and it's not just all good. There's going to be a mixture in all of our stories of beautiful things and not so beautiful things. And the truth is going to be honest and real about all of those things. So
we live in a world full of good and evil.
Right.
And it's all around us. We get to pick what we focus on, but our stories are a mixture of good and evil.
We're going to wrap up here. Is there anything else that was burning on your heart that you wanted to say in this podcast that I maybe left out, or do you feel like this is a good place to end?
I think I would just like to leave hope for anyone out there who is struggling with their family, because the pain is so intense when you're rejected by your family. I know that. And I don't live in sadness. I don't wake up and cry every day. But there was a time when I did. And it's because when I realized that I cannot change narcissistic people, it's impossible to change them, I had to release them and let them go and let God take care of them. Mm-hmm. And the chips will fall where they may about my memoir or anything else I do in my life, because I'm not living my life through the lens of what a narcissist expects from me anymore, because they asked me to play a game I could never win.
Right.
When I realized that narcissist is never going to change, I was able to let go.
Yes.
And that's where the freedom comes. The freedom comes with letting go.
Yep. I can totally relate to that. It takes, and to let go, you have to see that truth first. You have to accept it, because it's hard to accept the truth, but yeah, once you see that, then letting go is so important. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are listening. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say I was honored. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. For those of you who are listening, if you are a person of faith and the subjects that we're talking about here are important to you, please feel free to share, and also go over to iTunes podcasts and find the Flying Free podcast and leave a rating and a review. This is what helps other people to find this podcast. And I think we're done. So until next time, fly free.